All right, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Lovecraft Easing podcast. And as always, especially today, geez, the electricity went out like 10 minutes before. And I'm like, I guess we're not having a show today. And then it went right back on. So I think it's the heat here. But anyway, uh, our guest today is Sam Hamm. Sam, how are you?
Holding up nicely, thank you.
Let's
How's your bad self?
Not too bad. Not too bad. It's too damn hot here, Texas. Yeah. Um, yeah, Alan's up at 1 in the morning over there in the UK watching us. So
Oh,
let's do our
Is he out of his mind?
yeah, I was gonna,
he just
I was
doesn't want to
gonna
miss
say.
he just doesn't want to miss a good show, you know. So which I don't know why he's
We aren't,
watching us.
Alan, we aren't going to replace you regardless.
We can't, you know everything. So all right, let's do quick introductions and then talk to Sam. I'm Mike Davis. If you're watching for the first time, I'm the host of this whatever this is. So, um, we do this every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern, and you can watch it live, which you know if you're watching it live right now, or you can watch it anytime later. And we have horror guests, creative people in the horror field, sci-fi fields, talk about superheroes as we're going to do today, and just have a lot of fun. So, Matt, you have a prize today?
Yes, I do. The prize is back home, and I'm in Montana, so I'll just describe it. It is a paperback copy of The Wild Adventures of Cthulhu, Volume 1 by Will Murray. It's basically his collected mythos fiction. It's a paperback. It's very nice.
Yeah.
Uh, if you want to enter to win a copy, all you have to do is send an email to easingprizes@gmail.com. Put wild one in the subject line, and I draw a winner sometime in 6 to 8 weeks. So even if you're listening to this weeks later, you still have a chance to enter for this contest, and you could end up with a very nice paperback.
And I don't know who this young man is. He hasn't been here in quite a while. It says Benjamin Handelman, but yeah. Uh-huh. What's up,
Yeah.
Ben?
Oh, May was an interesting time I'd like to never repeat.
Okay.
You mentioned you're in Texas, so you understand how important air conditioning is and how
Oh,
expensive
yeah.
they are.
Oh, that's right. Your
For
air went
folks.
out. Jeez.
Yes,
Is it
yes,
back, I
yes.
hope?
It is. It is. Though it's a nice cool. It's only 91 degrees here today and raining, so it's
Only
not too bad.
91. Great.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
Well, hey, Sam. Good to see you again.
Oh yeah, man, I'm glad to be here. We're out here in San Francisco, and we've got a scorching, I believe it's 52 right now.
I'm jealous.
So
Sweater
yeah,
weather.
I may go and turn on the heat so I can join you guys and breaking out a sweat. Um,
Last I saw you when we did, for those of you who are Patreons, I did a Patreon episode with Sam a couple of years ago. That was a lot of fun. And now we're doing a regular episode. We're going to talk about Batman '89 and all kinds of stuff. So, Sam, for those out there who don't know who you are, could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm basically uh, primarily a screenwriter, written for movies and TV. I wrote the first Batman movie, worked on the sequel, Batman Returns. Had a TV series called Mantis, worked on Masters of Horror for Showtime, which was a great experience. I did two episodes with Joe Dante, and worked on some other things, a movie called Monkey Bone, one called Never Cry Wolf, um, and a bunch of projects that either didn't get made or I didn't get credit on. So yeah, I've been kicking around a while. Now, given my advanced decrepitude, I'm mostly retired, but have been writing a couple of comic book series for DC recently,
Yeah.
and that was always my boyhood ambition. And so now that I'm, reasonably close to kicking the bucket, I figured I would give it a try before they put me in the ground. So.
I don't know. I expect Matt to go before you do, really. But
Yeah,
yeah.
well, Benjamin with that cough, I don't know. He may be the he may be the dark horse here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think Sam, you're probably the youngest of us on here at this point.
Yeah.
Don't have much time left, it feels like today.
So you wrote Batman '89, and then what you're working on now, or what you have been working on recently, I should say, is basically a comic series that's a sequel series to Batman Returns. So Michael Keaton Batman. Would that be?
Exactly. DC Comics called me up one day and said, it turned out that the artist I've been working with, who is a great guy and terrific artist, does an amazing job with the likenesses of the various characters.
He does.
Joe Quinones had been trying for a few years to get DC to do what would be basically a continuation of the Michael Keaton, Tim Burton Batman stories. Says, okay, let's do a separate universe where Keaton and Burton continue to make these movies, as opposed to switching over to Val Kilmer and Joel Schumacher and
Right.
George Clooney
Right.
and all
Your
the stuff
series
that happened
ignores
there.
those two movies. So
Yeah, exactly. And so the idea was to do uh, what would be basically comic book adaptations of movies that did not exist. And they pitched the idea to me like that, and I thought, that's in its weird way, it's kind of a cool idea. And I had always wanted to do another Batman in which Billy D. Williams would play Two-Face. I was a huge Billy D. Williams fan when I was a kid. I was in high school when I saw Ryan's song, and I came to school the next day, and like all the like 350-pound jocks, the football players were all like standing over in the corner bawling their eyes out, and I would say, "Why are you guys crying?" They go like, "Brian's song," and I'm embarrassed to say that, as soon as they said Brian's song, I started bawling too. So it was had always wanted to write something for Billy D. Williams, and kind of in a weird ass way got the chance to do that by writing this series of comics. Um, so
yeah,
yeah, that's how I got roped in.
because he's a big focus of the first Batman '89 series, I
Yes.
guess you'd say. Well, I guess I wanted to say, when DC Comics calls you up and says, "Hey, you want to write Batman?" The right answer is yes, always, right? So, could you give the basic plot of the first series for those listening?
Yeah, basic plot of the first series is that Harvey Dent, who was an ambitious politician in Gotham City, has basically decided that the whole sort of uh, uh, relationship that Batman seems to be developing with the police department is corrupt and illegal, which what
Definitely the
what
second
kind
one.
of
Definitely the
what
second
kind
one.
of what kind of district attorney wouldn't think that?
Yeah.
I always wanted to see the scene where uh, Harvey Dent goes into court and is trying to put a criminal away with some piece of evidence that was delivered to them by a guy in a mask and a cape.
Right.
And they say like, oh, and then the provenance of this evidence is what? You mean the man in a mask and a cape was on the crime scene, assisting the police as they were in, et cetera, et cetera. Where is the man in the mask and the cape? Can he testify here? Is he willing to, can he speak under oath, et cetera, et cetera? And a DA would see case after case after case get thrown out as soon as you mention Batman's name. Um, he begins to think, for a variety of reasons, that this whole enterprise needs to be shut down. And his initial suspicion is that Bruce Wayne is part of a sort of cartel that is bankrolling uh, Batman, because he's got all this fancy equipment, he's got all this stuff that you could make millions of bucks trying to sell it to the U.S. government if you wanted to. The Department of Defense would love to have some of the gear that Batman has.
Yeah.
But the fact that Batman is not trying to sell it means that Batman does not need the $1 million that he would get from the Department of Defense. And that starts making him sniff around and investigate. At the same time, Batman is involved in a scrap where a kid, a young guy, a teenager that he has accidentally been chasing, thinking he's a serious criminal when actually he's tried to steal a bag of diapers from a nearby convenience store. Um, Batman tries to track the kid down. He's kind of, horrified to realize that, it's a kid who is trying to provide for his baby brother or baby sister. And while he's sort of stunned by this sort of misplay of what Batman is supposed to be doing, he gets attacked by a rival vigilante. And the rival vigilante, we find out eventually, is a kid named Drake Winston, a young man who works in a garage in Burnside, um, district of Gotham. And he sort of evolves into a Robin substitute. We never actually call him Robin. He
Yeah.
never takes the name Robin. We make some jokes to the effect that like, oh yes, this guy's going to wind up being Robin. And what happens is that Harvey Dent gets caught in a fire, which is set up for complicated reasons I won't explain here. And the two guys who happen to be closest to this event are Bruce Wayne, who is in the neighborhood for his own weird reasons, and the young guy who works in the garage. And the two of them managed to pull Harvey out of the fire, but not before his face has been horribly disfigured by battery acid. And once he begins to recuperate and sort of realizes that he's hideously disfigured and his political career is basically over because nobody's ever going to want to look at him on camera, he drifts sort of farther and farther away from reality and evolves into the two-faced character that we know with the coin you flip to determine whether you're going to do good, whether you're going to do bad. And Catwoman sneaks in, and there's a bunch of the action ensues, and that basically is what it's about.
It really is easy to see, and maybe this is obvious, but easy to see how Harvey Dent could devolve. First of all, the pain of having acid on half of your face, it's got to be intensely painful. And then, like it or not, part of the way we see ourselves has to do with how we look. That suddenly changes, then, you can see how his personality could devolve.
Well,
So,
see, I also thought that it was a spectacular casting coup to have Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent because this is a guy who was promoted, all through the 70s in the early part of his career. They said this is the Black Clark Gable. They said, this guy is going to be, he's going to be the big sort of breakthrough romantic star.
right.
And he was leading man. He's like a matinee idol in terms of his looks. So when you take that away from him, what happens to him? The other thing is in our series we don't make a big deal of it, but he's also inhaled a bunch of stuff in the fire and from the battery acid, from the smoke, et cetera, et cetera, and his lungs are pretty much burned out. The medics say that he's got a pretty good chance of keeling over dead sometime in the next 6 months just from the damage to his lungs.
Yeah.
And so that's part of his devolution too.
No
It's like,
consequences.
yeah, it's like, am I going to try to, stay with my long-term plan of politics? Am I going to do something good for the world? Am I going to do something good for my friends and neighbors in the Burnside district, so forth and so on? Or, in the 4 or 5 months that I may have left to me, what am I going to be? And becomes a huge sort of existential question for him, and he defaults. He stops trying to make a moral decision. He lets a coin decide it for him.
Right.
And So one of the things that I also wanted to do is you always see, Two-Face flips the coin and then Two-Face does something bad. But I wanted to have a few scenes where he flips the coin and he does, the thing he does that is good is positively good, as opposed to just like, well, I won't shoot you. I'll refrain from shooting you, which I would have done if the coin had come up on the
Yeah.
bad side.
Yeah.
But the coin comes up good. I'm going to do something good. I'm going to do something good for the world. I'm going to do something good for the citizens of Gotham. I'm going to do et cetera, et cetera. And so, the schism is just that much more intense with him.
Sam, that's brilliant writing because I had never thought about that in reading Batman. It's always, well, it's not that he's going to do good, it's that I'm going to refrain from doing bad when the good side comes up, you
Yeah.
know. So, so yeah, that's brilliant. Um,
Well, thank you.
well, I want to ask, well, first of all, I got to say um, that in order to prepare to speak with you today, I had read Batman 89 and read Echoes as far as it's gone right now, but I had to I went and reread them, refreshed my memory and everything, and I mean, how much can one man give? You know what I mean? To have to read Batman for his job. So I feel really lucky. So it's not a high paying job, but I do love it. But yeah, I reread those. What were when you first started writing it, in your mind, what were some of the challenges of, okay, it's adapting it from the movies to a comic book in your mind? What were some of those challenges?
First ground rule that we set down, I was talking to my editors, Andy Curry and Andrew Marino, and also talking with Joe when we were first just sort of like batting around, what do you want to do, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And the big decision was no thought balloons. I wrote a Batman comic back in '89, right around the time that the original movie was coming out. And it was like a three-issue
Blind
deal
Justice.
called Blind Justice. Yeah, exactly. And it leaned very heavily on, thought balloons. It leaned on captions. You had a bunch of different narrators with captions pushing the story along and so forth and so on. And there were a lot of places where I was trying to sort of work contrapuntally. The caption is saying one thing, but you're seeing like what the action that you're seeing is ironically opposed to,
Right.
what's in the caption and so forth and so on.
Right.
Kind of the caption comments on the action, but at the same time the action would comment on the captions. So no captions, no thought balloons. You've got to do everything just based on what the characters say and do. Um, the way you do in a movie, because unless you have a voiceover or something like that, you don't have that kind of
Which they
device.
didn't really do until the newest Batman movie. They didn't really
Yeah,
do any voiceovers.
yeah,
And a lot of Batman comics, and I have read a lot of them. The captions are the implication is it's Batman's journal, you know.
yeah,
What's
yeah,
what's
So
funny is, so I reread these as well today, and I also reread the two adaptations for Batman and Batman Returns that Denny O'Neil did back in the
yeah.
in my childhood at least. And what's funny is Thought Balloons have been out of comics for, I don't know, 25 years now or something. And as soon as you said that, I actually just went back and looked, and those comics don't have Thought Balloons or captions either. So it's one of the things that I'd noted is like, oh wow, when I read those two adaptations of your screen work, and then when reading Shadows, the first series, and Echoes, this one, they all feel coherent. And that's that key. I didn't realize that was it until you just said that
yeah.
there's no thought balloons, there's no captions. You're reading the dialogue and you're watching the action. So thank you for mentioning. I kept trying to figure out like how it maintained that continuity, and that's great.
And
Yeah, it's the stuff that it's the stuff you take out of the palette that actually maintains the continuity in among those four comics. Yeah.
it's not just Batman, but thought balloons have, I guess, could be accurate to say that have gone. have turned into captions. You know,
Yeah, the
it's
thought balloon has fallen on hard times,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
but in these bringing that up in these four works, we don't even get the captions. I want to say maybe there's like a very small handful somewhere in there that'll tell you a location, maybe.
oh yeah,
Um,
exactly. I'll have a caption that says, Gotham City
right.
or across town or something like that.
But reading it, it feels, as you said, it feels very cinematic. There's
Yeah,
dialogue and action on the screen, and it works perfectly.
yeah.
Well, that's just that's a matter of putting on the handcuffs. So,
Uh, I'm wondering. I'm trying to remember, and I don't think it happened before Batman '89. But in any iteration before, did he ever say "I'm Batman"? Because it seems like you started that with Batman '89, and Christian Bale says it, um, for example.
I think Batman. I think the movie is the first place where he actually says, "I'm Batman."
Yeah,
Because after the movie is taking place when it starts out when he's a rumor. He's like an urban legend. There's this 6-foot bat that's drinking people's blood and throwing them off the roof and so forth and so on. But I think one reason that he never says that is because like uh, if you're far enough along in the continuity, everybody knows who he is.
yeah,
And it's like, you don't have to say I'm Batman because the other guy has already said, oh shit, it's Batman.
yeah. Uh, I never thought in my life I'd get the chance to say this, but when I first saw Batman '89, I was 20, I think. And every time I've seen it since, I've always thought how that opening scene, Sam, is so brilliant because for anyone who knows the story, you think with this couple and their boy who are lost, going through Gotham, you think you're seeing for a few minutes Bruce Wayne, the origin of Batman, but it turns out not to be. It's just it's a mirror. So
It's a head fake. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. It's a kind of, it's a little gag that's thrown in there to kind of trick the fans because the fans coming in know where Batman comes from.
right.
The great unwashed public that knows the character probably through the TV series more than anything else is not familiar with Batman's origin story. Doesn't know that his parents were murdered by a street punk, and that this drove him to dress up like a bat. Um, and go out and kick criminal ass instead of doing what the rest of the millionaires are doing this week. Um, and so you want to, I wanted to do a little moment where the fans are going to see this and the fans are going to get kind of geeked and they're going to
Right.
think, oh yeah, this is the sort of primal moment. And then you pull the rug out and go like, no, nope, no, it's not. No, it's not. This is Batman reliving the primal moment as he looks down and sees these punks holding a kid at gunpoint and with his parents. And so what happens to them is going to be especially bad
Exactly. You,
because
you hear that
because
you hear
the
that crunch
yeah,
on the ass on the of gravel on the roof, and the criminal. You're like, oh shit, here it comes.
yeah.
W- and I realize I'm flipping back and forth, and Ben and Matt, please jump in anytime. But I'm flipping back and forth between the comics and the movie, but um, the first movie. But what about that controversial decision to make the Joker the guy who killed his parents instead of Joe Chill, for example?
Yeah,
I liked it. I'm not criticizing it. I'm asking where it came from and what influenced that decision.
I never liked it.
Hmm.
It did a lot of because I feel number one, it did a lot of sort of structural damage to the screenplay and the way that I set it up. Tim really wanted to have the Joker be the guy who
Oh,
killed
I
Bruce
see.
Wayne's parents, and part of it was, as an idea, it became viable late in the process because originally we were talking about we didn't think we could get Jack Nicholson. The studio always wanted Jack Nicholson. Uh, we didn't think there was a chance in hell that Jack Nicholson was going to want to play the Joker in a movie of Batman. Like, come on, are you serious? Um, and when that happened, uh, it made the idea viable that
Yeah, I
the
see.
Joker was old enough that he could have, presumably as a young punk, shot and killed Bruce Wayne's parents. If that's 25 years ago, um, becomes viable if Jack Nicholson is the character and Michael Keaton is Batman. Um, And so, by the time they were doing that, the movie was in production. It was in rewrites by Warren Scarron, and there was also a British writer who came in at one point when the American writers were on strike in the spring of '88. We had a long strike. We had about a 6-month strike at that point, just as the movie was going into production. Yeah. So, but no, I had number one not liked the idea just because I thought it was kind of pat dramatically that there is this event that's happened to Bruce Wayne that's basically sort of wrecked his life for him. It's sent him down a path, and he didn't have anybody to say, no, don't do that. He didn't have anybody to say,
Right.
like, just try to lighten up, try to be a normal kid, go have some fun, et cetera, et cetera. He didn't have any kind of loving environment or framework or whatever that would allow him to get over his profound grief. And so instead, he nursed it. All these years, that was what he hung on to. He had been wronged, and he was going to go out and fix it. And my conception of the character was always just sort of that he could never fix it. He could not get revenge on the world for what happened to his parents. And I felt like, okay, he goes out and it's like he's been Batman for 6 weeks, and boom, first thing that happens is he runs into the guy who killed his parents, who turns out to be the Joker,
Yeah,
and there are these adversaries, and they come up against each other, and wham, okay, got the guy that killed my parents. Now what?
yeah, that's a good
And
point.
I'm in the minority on this. I mean, I think most people regard it as a sort of narrative master stroke that the Joker turns out to be the guy who killed his parents. But there are just a bunch of reasons why I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it. So
Well, Zack Snyder said one time that you have to realize whenever you make a DC movie, DC superhero movie, he said every movie, in essence, you're creating an Elseworld story.
yeah.
And so that's why I personally don't tend to get too upset one way or another when I see a DC Comics movie. I feel like I'm watching another Elseworlds, and that's fine. You know,
Well, and the other thing is the character of Batman at this point, it's like what, 80 years now, or
yeah,
it's probably no, it's all pushing 90.
he's
It'll be
getting
90
old.
years. Yeah, he's older than we are. My God. Um, And at this point, the character is like it's like Sherlock Holmes. I mean, you get variations. You get people who come in and they have like hey, here's a new take on Sherlock Holmes.
Right.
Here's a new take on this famous character that everybody knows. And it's sort of like that with Batman now. There are it's hilarious to me that there's like this whole generation of fans that is able to keep straight in their heads what is Earth 89 and what is Earth 97 and what yeah, et cetera, who are who
Right.
are so who are so immersed in the notion of a multiverse
Yeah.
and what is canonical and what is not. And okay, this is canonical in Earth 89, this is canonical in Earth 97, and you know, and this is not canonical in any of those Earths.
Yeah.
And when you get into those controversies, it's like you sort of understand where theology comes from.
Yeah.
It's like,
I've never cared what's canonical. Is it a good
yeah, I
story?
mean,
Is it a good
it's
story?
it's mystifying to me because I mean, what you want to do is the analogy that I've always used, it's like a jazz standard. You know, you want somebody to come along and play this song that you've heard uh, uh, 10 dozen times
Right.
and find something new in it. Makes they come along, they play some old chestnut and they make it theirs. And you go like, holy shit, I couldn't believe that was in that song because I've heard it so many times and I didn't get that.
Yeah.
Um, and that's the great pleasure of hearing a jazz artist come in and do a weird interpretation of some Broadway tune.
Well, canonical, that's a good segue. I wanted to ask you about the Batman killing versus not killing um, concept and where you stand on it and your thoughts and feelings on it.
Um, I got a lot of flack because Batman had guns in the Batwing. And all I said was like, hey, go back and read your Origin of Batman stories. Go back and read the first, from
Right.
first few issues after the case of the Chemical Syndicate. He packed heat. Batman was carrying a rod, which he obviously evolved away from using. And I suspect the reason he evolved away from using it was because, you're selling um, 10 cent comic books to pre-adolescent kids who are 7 and 8 and who identify with Batman. And, you don't necessarily want to have an armed vigilante going around shooting people. And so, that becomes part of the mythology that he doesn't do that. But, I don't think Batman should ever kill gratuitously. And, I tried not to have Batman doing any, gratuitous killing in the first script. And I was one of the things that I actively disliked about Batman Returns was, he kills a couple of guys just as a sight gag.
Right.
He blows one guy up and throws him in a manhole and,
Yeah.
torches another
He
guy
didn't have
with
to
the,
do that. He could have just
yeah,
hit him
yeah.
in the
He
face.
swivels his car, torches another guy with his nuclear exhaust or whatever it is that comes out of the back of the vehicle. And all right, if you want to have Batman kill somebody, you have to make it a little more morally weighty than that for
Yeah.
me. That's just like oh, huh. It's like the standard gag now where um, characters set off a bomb in the background, but they've walked like 30 feet away from the building and they don't bother to turn around to see it going off.
Yeah.
It's like all in a day's work.
Uh, yeah, morally weighty, like Man of Steel. I mean, we have a guy who just quote became Superman, and he's faced all these guys who are just as powerful as he is. Now he's facing a guy who's got all his powers, and as Zod says, where did you train? On a farm? Zod trained from almost from birth to be a soldier, and this is his one advantage on the guy. He's either got to break his neck or let him fry these humans. That's morally weighty, you know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And the whole thing with the Joker at the end of Batman is Batman is basically going to sacrifice himself to get rid of the Joker. Because he says, I'm responsible for creating this thing that is, unleashing poison gas all over the city and so forth and so on. So when he goes up in the Belfry, his idea is that they're both going to, he actually, I believe, has a bomb strapped to himself, if I can remember the original draft. I don't think that bit is in there in the movie. But he's gonna go up and he's gonna grab hold of the Joker and both of them go out at the same time. And so he basically is on a suicide mission when he goes up into the Belfry, and he is willing to kill the Joker, but only at the expense of his own life
Hmm. But
because Number one, he's doing it to save all the people that the Joker would have killed, and number two, he's expiating for
Yeah.
the crime of creating the Joker, you know.
Ben, I think you had a question or comments.
Yeah. So, first you mentioned Joe Coyne on this earlier, and I do want to kind of like compliment his art again. One of the
Yeah.
things, a lot of people that do adaptations of live action work, when they're drawing faces, there's a tendency in modern comics, like the Star Wars comics are really guilty of this, where they'll trace. They'll get a picture of the actor, they'll trace the actor's face, and it always looks ridiculous. In comic book fans, we often joke about certain comic book artists that have been caught tracing porn, for example. So we'll call it like porn face and things. It's just, it looks bad. Joe doesn't do that. Like, he's clearly, you can see Michael Keaton, you can see the influence, but it looks like a comic book. I feel like I'm reading a comic book. I don't feel like I'm reading something that's been traced. So that's something I really appreciate, the work he put in. Even if I understand it may take a long time to get these issues out, they're great. They feel in line with what we got before. It's a wonderful story to read, and the art is really doing a great job of communicating that story. So even though he's not here, I want to give him kind of his accolades.
Oh,
Because this
I
is,
feel like that. I feel like that guy just deserves so much credit for any popularity that series may have had. He is just a phenomenal uh, facial artist,
Yeah.
and it just astounded me over and over when I would see his stuff. When I would first get a look at his finished pencils and things like that, and how dynamic his drawing was, and how he always seemed to capture the right expression, you know. And one of the things that you lose when you're writing a comic instead of a movie is you lose performance. And you assume, okay, you gotta, in a movie, you're thinking about, okay, how is the actor going to read the line? You're thinking, what is the actor looking at when he reads the line? Is the actor throwing the line away, or is the actor punching the line? What is the timing? All of that kind of stuff. And comic book writing is a little different from that. Comic book writing, you have to kind of do exposition, but Joe has the ability in a static panel to give you some sense of what the character is like, some sense of what the character is thinking, even if it's not the same as what the character is saying. And I just, I was really awed all the way around to see his stuff in that regard. And he also, as you say, you talk about tracing, but he also is careful to do the characters with just enough distance from the people, the real actors who are his models, who are sort of his, mental prototypes for what these characters should be. And I just think he did a fantastic job all around.
yeah, in an industry that's full of a bunch of talented people. It's really kind of awe-inspiring sometimes reading it and just being able to just enjoy the action in the book, and the art is so key to
Ben,
that.
with Danny Elfman's soundtrack in the background as you're reading the comic.
Yeah, not a bad idea.
Or am I a nerd?
No.
But I think there is a plan in the works, or there was at one point. I don't know if this ever came about, but I think they were going to do a reissue that came with the Elfman soundtrack.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Wow, that's
yeah,
they
cool.
did. So the first volume, Shadows, the original Batman '89. I don't even original, the one that came out a couple years ago.
yeah,
That
yeah.
Batman '89 series, Shadows, did get released with the vinyl, a new vinyl release of.
Oh,
Yes,
you're
right.
kidding. I did not know that.
Yeah,
That's
it's like a
awesome.
weird. I think it was like a purple disc. I'd have to go back and look at it. It was really fancy. They did it for Superman as well, the companion series.
Superman 78, yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things, so even looking at, it's called Batman '89. I'm gonna say it takes place on like '94-ish, somewhere around there. Um,
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's supposed to be, it's Batman '89 because it's the Batman of the movie
right.
that came out in 1989. But the story is obviously several years later, so I would guess it's probably around '94. Yeah,
There's some
sounds right.
fun little, for those of us old enough to remember the '90s. There's some fun like Bruce Wayne has to send a fax to Drake at one point.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
And the
fun little things like
computers.
that. You
Yeah.
know, like my son would have no idea what that is. He would just stare at confused, like, what? Why is he at a printer? I don't understand.
Well,
And
before
it's
you get to thinking you're too old, Ben, that's about the time I met my wife and married a year and a half later. So,
oh, yeah. So
Well,
uh,
you know,
it's
the other thing is like the other thing that drops out of the equation is cell phones.
mhm.
yes,
And you know, there are a couple of
absolutely.
places where Bruce has like the big clunky. It looks like a shoe, basically, his cell phone and so forth and so on. But we were like and by the time we got to Echoes, it's like I'm saying like, well, Harley Quinn has the first Motorola flip phone at this point, so she can just go up the stairs and talk on her flip phone. And we tried to get everything basically technologically synced up with where the movie would have been um,
Yeah.
on a typical timeline if they had been cranking out another Batman movie every 2 to 3 years.
and
Sam,
I like that. So for example, and I don't want to spoil who it is for people that will read it, but Barbara Gordon has like a contact that like a hacker that she talks to, you know, who has like an alias and things, and the way it's worked in, it feels contemporary. I also like that a lot of the characters that you've included, you've made I'm going to say like minor adjustments because it's an adaptation. So for example, I loved that the Riddler, instead of being Edward Nigma being his real name, it's an alias and it's Edward Nigel Maynard. I thought that was brilliant. I never thought it's always kind of like, oh, his name's ridiculous. And
yeah.
sometimes you get some weird decisions like the recent Penguin TV series. They renamed him to like Oz Cobb or something, which I thought was even worse than his original name. And then this name, it was like, oh, this works perfectly. Like it sounds like a real person and it fits his alias as we've always known him the last I don't know, the Riddler's probably from the 60s, so like
Yeah, Ben,
50,
you're
60 years
right
old.
about Joe, absolutely right, but also this you're a brilliant writer. This series and the decisions you made are just so great, especially for us fans. So,
Yeah.
Wait, what are you guys talking to me?
yeah, we're complimenting you with you in
Get
the
out of
room.
here. Get out of here.
But I even like there's a scene of Alfred helping him solve some things. And again, I don't
Yeah.
want to spoil what's happening, and I feel like even talking about that scene would spoil half the new series, but there's a great scene of like Alfred helping him solve stuff, and the Alfred in that movies we don't get to see do too much other than kind of like provide grandfatherly wisdom. So for me it was kind of a fun scene of like, oh wow, Alfred's not like this former super spy or whatever that a lot of the modern comics were doing. It's like he's helping Batman solve crimes. It's like this is really interesting. This is a lot of fun to read.
Yeah, well, one of the things we just did not have room to squeeze in there. I mean, and I was, I, I just could not bring myself to call a guy Edward Nigma.
Yeah.
It's like, bring me a phone book, find me a phone book anywhere in the U.S. with a person named Nigma in it, and then of course, Enigma sounds bad if you say it too quickly. And so they had to change it from Nigma to Nygma. And you can't find a Nygma in a phone book either. And it's like, oh, please, come on here. So yeah, I wanted to uh, fix that little problem. Number one, but the thing with Alfred, there was a scene that I had to cut because there just wasn't room for it, where he explains that it was a team, and this is true. I mean, this is a thing that was uh, 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 portrayed in the Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. The people that broke the Enigma code were a crew of British crossword puzzle solvers who were recruited by the English government to come in and start figuring out how you would crack a code. And they were literally people that were brought in a contest to see who could solve cryptic crossword puzzles the fastest. And so there was going to be a gag where, Alfred explains this to Bruce, in a rather huffy way. And he said, if it weren't for the English crosswords, you would be solving this puzzle in German. And
True.
didn't have room for it. But Oh,
Yeah.
the Batman '89 Echoes cut scenes reel. Oh, it is fabulous, fabulous. So much good
See,
stuff in there.
that's the great thing about the hardcover that's coming out in a couple months, right? Like you guys can include those sketches and cut scenes. It'll work out perfectly.
I'll pull out all those scenes that Joe never drew and make him draw them. He'll love that.
Oh yeah.
I'll bet.
Look, if we can get more of your writing and his drawing, which, there's not been a third series announced, but I feel like as long as you live to like 180, we can just keep this going forever, right?
Well, I would, yes, I've, I haven't, the beautiful thing is I kind of decided like, this is it. I am weary. I hate the sound of deadlines whizzing past my ears, which I've heard all of my adult life. And so, I want to take a little break from it. Um, if I were to come back to it, I'd want to come back with a little more, inspiration than I have right now. Because I'm pretty much I think I've pretty much, I've told the stories about Batman that I have to tell about Batman in my back pocket. I'd have to think
Yeah.
up some new angles on Batman to go
This
into it.
this
I
is
mean,
probably
I wanted to do Echoes
yeah.
just as that was to please Joe. Joe wanted to do
Really?
another one. I thought, God, this guy did such a phenomenal job on the first one. I can't, he's the one person I couldn't say no to. And, I said, what do you want to have in it? And he said, I want to, well, we haven't done like Arkham Asylum yet. And I was going like, well, I always thought Arkham Asylum was kind of boring because, why would you establish in the middle of Gotham City a place that was basically like the service academy for supervillains. It's like,
With terrible
come
security.
come to Arkham Asylum as just an ordinary street punk, and we'll send you out as Killer Croc, you know. But it's what Joe wanted to do. So I started thinking about, what fun could I have with it, and then I realized that both um, the Scarecrow and Harley Quinn were evil psychiatrists. And I thought, well, all right, there's an angle. And then I started thinking, I always shied away from having too many villains. I didn't want to like bring the whole rogues gallery in and have, Batman fights the entire, legion of supervillains, uh, or whatever. But I kind of got the idea. Number one, I wanted to do an homage to a great, great, great Sam Fuller movie called Shock Corridor, which is about a reporter who fakes being nuts so that he can get committed to an asylum where a murder has taken place. And he wants to go in as a patient and try and see what kind of information he can figure out about this murder. And I thought, like, well, what would be kind of fun if Bruce Wayne went to the nut house. And so it just kind of evolved outward
He's
from
halfway
there.
there already anyway, so
Well, yeah, I was going to say, it's like, what took you so long?
speaking of Batman Echoes, which for those who don't know, that's the
If I could just comment, that sounds like a story that was written by Carl Edward Wagner in one of his two horror collections. He had a short story about a reporter who wanted to figure out what was going on in a mental asylum and faked him
really.
as a patient, but the doctor actually had his number all the way.
Ah,
It's a very interesting story. It just came to mind. It's
oh,
either in that
if
place or
you
Why
can,
Not You and I.
yeah, you got to hit me with the title of that one. I want
If
to,
I can find it, let me look.
yeah, I want
Yeah,
to, I want to track that down and read it straight away.
it's funny because when you were saying it was reminds me of the line from the Stephen King Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption where he says
Yeah,
like, "Oh, I had to go to prison to become a criminal."
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and
Mhm.
yeah, I was thinking about that in the scene where Bruce is like being interviewed by Dr. Crane. There's some really interesting stuff that happens that people should definitely buy the book and read. And the final point I wanted to make is I realize you're
And
going to take a
if
break
you
after
if you
this.
don't want to, the people who don't want to buy the book and read it can just, they can just send me a nickel. Same, all the same to me.
Yeah. Well, I want people to actually enjoy the work. Like it's so because even though like you took I don't know, 25-year break between Batman Returns and Shadows. I think, is it 30 years? I don't even know anymore.
Yeah,
Um,
I think it's yeah, closer to I think it's yeah, over 30. Yeah.
oh,
Terrifying.
yeah, I remember as a little kid watching these things, so
Jeez.
it's catching up to me as well. Um, but your voice for Batman, and it's something that a lot of writers struggle with. They struggle with, like, how do I write Bruce Wayne and Batman and make this work without making him either sound psychotic, going for like that cool edge, or humanizing him too much. You have that right balance, and it carries forward into these series like you never took a break. So I don't
Well,
know
thank
how
you.
you.
That is the rare compliment that I will happily accept. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think it's really important, and I really want people to read these because it feels like you can go from those two movies and go right into these, and that voice doesn't change. It feels like the characters that they're meant to be, and that's so critical as a fan who I've spent my whole life. I've probably seen that original movie well over 100 times. I had the I remember getting that VHS for Christmas and watching it so many times the tape broke. And like, that was my childhood. That was, and it wasn't just me. Everyone I knew was obsessed. There was that one, the Ninja Turtles movie that came out the next year. There was like a series of movies where we would just put those tapes in over and over and over. And so this is like a movie that is so ingrained in my subconscious. Like, I can put the movie on and start just repeating the dialogue without even hearing it. So to be able to get these kind of like sequels, uh, as an adult, an old man myself now, it's so fun to kind of go back and read them.
Old man, huh?
Well, again, thank you.
I really liked in Batman Echoes, which is the second series for those who don't know. Uh, in the first issue, where Batman, this is not a spoiler to say because it's shown right away. Batman's been missing for 2 years, and you have these Batman imitators um, trying to be vigilantes themselves and end up dying mostly. But what's really interesting is that some of the criminals, when they see someone in a Batman costume, they go nuts, absolutely nuts. They have like a mental breakdown. And I thought that was so interesting. Hooked me right away. So, yeah, that's another compliment that, you know.
Well, yeah, thank you. No, that's the sorry, I was late on my cue there. No, thank you. Yeah, you tried. That was a tricky bit because I didn't want to show Bruce in the first issue
Yeah.
for reasons that you would understand that the general public that we're talking to may not. So I don't want to spoil anything about the first issue. But the trick is, how do you get some Batman in there? How do you how do you at least get the cape and the cowl and the bat insignia and all of that kind of stuff into the story if you're kind of trying to keep Bruce and the real Batman off stage. And so that's kind of what that was. And it also developed into obviously later part of the story, um, because there are some guys who have undergone a few things, who wind up back out on the street. Uh, and yeah, but
A real funny line from that first issue, too. Barbara Gordon is now the commissioner, and Bullock's in it, in the series. And she says to Bullock, now stop thinking. You're not very good at it. I love that. This might seem like a very basic question, but
I,
how,
I wanted to. I was talking about cut scenes before.
yeah.
Another cut scene. There was a scene where Batman was going to try to enlist Bullock because he doesn't have any connections to the police department anymore since Barbara Gordon has been, she's been under an investigation. And he goes to Bullock and he says, you may not realize this, but I saved your life. When Harvey Dent was trying to, raid the police department. And he says, well, I understand it. So according to some other people, you were just trying to use me as a hostage so you could get out. And he says, well, that's not the case. He says, Batman just says, look, what did I do? Why do you hate me so much? And he says, the real reason I hate you is because you do what we do, except you don't have any paperwork. And that I thought is always that's got to be why the police really have a bug up their ass about Batman.
I've actually seen that once or twice. In there's a novel called Batman Dead White, where in one scene where Bullock is thinking that to himself, that
Ah, okay.
yeah, that he wishes that he could do what Batman does without paperwork, and he mentions without bureaucracy. You know,
Wait a minute. This means that all my ideas are not completely original?
no, I think he stole it from you, actually. So,
I hate when people steal ideas before I have them. That's the worst.
uh, I want to ask. I don't want to keep you too long, but I want to ask: in what ways do does Batman Returns differ from your original concept of it, your ideas, your writing?
Oh, it's wildly different, and it's for a lot of reasons. Tim was sort of off doing other stuff at the time,
Hmm.
and so instead of working closely with Tim as I did on the first one, I wound up being, basically sent through the gauntlet of Warner Brother execs, and they were very intent, number one, on having two villains. They wanted Catwoman and Penguin. I was still trying to agitate for Harvey Dent, Two-Face in there. Um, and the obvious thing is if you have Catwoman, you want to have a romantic relationship develop between Catwoman and Batman. But they were also dead insistent that they were going to get Kim Basinger back as Vicky Vale. And so the position that I'm in is like, okay, now you have to have a weird kind of triangular thing where uh, uh, Vicky Vale is the good girl and Catwoman is the bad girl.
Right.
And that kind of deformed the story for me and made me feel like it didn't work as well as it should have. Um, and it's different in a lot of ways. I mean, the whole stuff with the Penguin, I feel like they never quite found a through line, a plot line for the Penguin. It's like the first half of the movie, he's trying to become the mayor, and then they, pull the old gag where you release the tapes of him saying, "Ha ha," the voters of Gotham are suckers, et cetera, et cetera. And this makes people turn on him, which we know is,
Yeah,
which we know in the modern world is
that doesn't
not
happen.
the
No,
case. No,
no,
that doesn't
no,
work that way. It
no.
doesn't work that way. But yeah, it was a matter where it seemed to me like it was just, by the skin of its teeth, just barely enough, close enough for me to get story credit on it,
Mm.
from just from some few sequences and very, very, very general outline of the plot. Um,
Sequences. Could you name a couple that were stayed in the movie
oh,
that
it's
were
like,
interesting?
a couple of bits like where he does his first Batwing descent through the city
Hmm.
and stuff like that. And there's some action bits and things like that that are
Right.
that are from there. Um,
This may seem like a very basic question for you, Sam, but I don't know the answer, so I'm going to ask. How does I've wondered, being such a lifelong reader of comic books, how does one write comics? I mean, are you writing a story and you're paneling it out for the artist? Do you just write it and the artist decides from there, or how does that work?
there, Denny O'Neil taught me this. I asked Denny when I was coming in to write Blind Justice these many years ago, like send me a couple of comic scripts so I can just see the format and see how it works and all this kind of stuff. And he sent me a couple of his scripts, and he said, his goal in writing a comic script was to have one page of script equal one page of art. So if you had, like, 6 panels, you would describe 6 panels as concisely as possible in the dialogue that you're going to have in those. You try to make that equal one page.
Okay.
And then he also sent me Alan Moore's script for The Killing Joke. And dear God, Killing Joke is like, what, a 45-page comic book or something like that. And the typescript that Alan Moore wrote is something like 215
I'm not
pages.
surprised. Yeah.
And it's like every detail in, stupefying proliferation of detail. He has one there's literally one section in which he is talking about how much stubble Batman should have on his face. About how long it's been since Batman shaved. And all this, it's like you cannot imagine the level of um,
Well, we had Leslie Klinger on the
micromanagement.
yeah, we had Leslie Klinger on the show, and he did the annotated Watchmen, and he didn't talk to Alan Moore about it because Alan Moore's sick of talking about Watchmen.
Yeah,
But he's like there was a wealth of things to draw from in the annotated Watchmen. Believe me, you know.
yeah. Well, when I was doing the first draft of Watchmen back in '78 or whenever it was, I had to put the comic books away because every time I would go into them, I would want to consult the comic books and see, okay, like what happens here? How do I pull this out? How do I make this work? I would find a detail that I recognized because it was picked up from 2 issues ago. And then I'd
Right.
start like paging through it, and it would be like 4 issues later, it's there too. And it would be, like, and then 3 issues after that. And so you can't get any work done.
Right.
I mean, every time you try to dip into Watchmen, you find something else that is forming a thread that it's a really shockingly complicated piece of architecture. I don't know
Yeah.
what else to call it, but there are two ways to write a script to go back to your actual question. Um, there's what's called the Marvel method, which was apparently, Stan Lee's preferred approach, where you just say like, everybody they land on the alien planet, and you have a big fight in the ice palace, and so and so character gets taken captive, and then the other character busts him out or her out or whatever. And the artist will then, draw
Right.
this over as many pages as the artist needs to convey this stuff. And then Stan would come back in and put in dialogue balloons. And the other way, the way that Denny and obviously Alan Moore work, is to just do a sort of panel by panel description of what's happening. And it's harder for me. It's much harder than writing a movie
Yeah.
because in a movie you can just say the car runs into a fire hydrant, and the director is going to figure out how many shots he needs to convey that and what the effect that he wants to go for is and how long you hold on the water and everybody getting soaked and all of that kind of stuff. But if you're writing a full script for a comic, you have to sort of work out how many panels you're going to need to sell an idea, what you're going to show in those panels, what you can skip and what you emphasize. So in a weird way, it's kind of like pre-directing.
Hmm.
But at the same time, the great pleasure is you get pages back from a guy like Quinones, and he's gonna do shit you can't even imagine. It's gonna come back looking so much better than the puny little version that you thought up when you were trying to get it down on paper. And it's just, it's a real joy. It's a real joy to see, how to see how a really good artist can fix your crummy ideas. We'll put it that way.
Uh, I'd like to ask you a few questions to close. Like, well, oh, first of all, I know what I was going to ask you. I did not realize that you knew Dennis O'Neil, who I think is just such a brilliant writer.
Yeah, he was my editor.
So
Yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
He was my editor on Blind Justice.
yeah. Can you talk about him a little bit?
He was like, hey, I was a fanboy too.
Yeah.
Uh, I was reading Denny O'Neil when he was Sergis O'Shaughnessy over at Charlton Comics, before he came over to DC with, Dick Giordano and all those guys. And I've said a bunch of times before that I think, probably the most influential Batman story for me anyway was the Joker's Five-Way Revenge, which was, I guess it was 72 or 73. I would think. And he was, by that point working with Neil Adams. Neil Adams and Jim Aparo were both doing Batman at that point. It seems like to me. And he was just to me he was a sort of he was a heroic figure.
Yeah.
And so the way I took that job is I read an interview where Denny O'Neil was saying, "Oh yeah, I read the Batman script and we all loved it here, and it was really it really sort of set up Batman like you could imagine that character existing in the world." And so if that guy, that Sam Hamm guy, ever wanted to write a Batman comic, he should just call us up. So I went like, "Shit, all right,"
Yeah.
called him up. And I just said, thank you, thank you. And he said, well, it just so happens we have this idea for a 60th, 50th, 60th. What was it then?
50th, I
I
think.
guess, yeah, 50th anniversary Batman adventure. And would you like to write it? No, I was going like, shit. I got all this,
The answer
got
is
all this
always
other,
yes, right?
yeah, I got all this other work I have to do stacked up in front of me here. But yeah, I'd kind of like to write that. And so that's how that came about. And I only met him a couple of times. I corresponded with him a lot. I talked with him a lot on the phone. And I would ask him questions like, uh, how far away from Gotham City is Wayne Manor? And he'd say, oh, nobody really knows. I say, oh, okay. So can I like put it
Depends on
wherever
which
I want
universe you're
to?
in.
Yeah, right.
Which
It's like
which part of the
give me a little
multiverse?
give me a little concrete help here, buddy.
Yeah.
Um, but there was just all this just basic stuff that you figure out they would know, but they don't. And as you say, it's just people come in and make the story work based on what they need the story to be,
Right.
and it's kind of what makes comics fun. I remember if you read DC comics back in the early '60s, which probably before you were born, but uh, there would always be some kid writing in saying, on page 23, you showed Jimmy getting into a red Volkswagen, but in issue 59, 3 months ago, Jimmy had a purple Volkswagen. And it's stuff like that. And they would say, okay, congratulations, kid, you caught us,
I remember a
and
letter to the editor in Batman and the Outsiders where what's her name, the Glow girl, I can't remember her name, was playing the harp, and a couple issues later, somebody wrote in and said, not the harp, the flute, and said, "Let me give you a hint about what I'm going to say. I play the flute," and then the editor wrote in, "Uh-oh." Do you remember his fables? I've talked about this on this series, this show before. I He had a three-issue fables where the first issue it was Batman annual, Arrow annual, and the Question annual, and it was a
I remember the question one. I don't think I've read the Batman one.
well, they all flow into one story. It's Batman and then Green Arrow and then the
Yeah.
Question one. And it's just if someone were to say, Mike, what's the best example of Dennis O'Neill's writing? I would be like, that's amazing, you know.
Yeah.
So yeah. Um, all right, so let me ask you this. Besides Michael Keaton, I assume your favorite Batman is Keaton, but I guess I shouldn't assume. Besides him, who's your favorite Batman in the series? What's your favorite Batman movie besides those films?
Whew. Oh, wow. That is a tough one. Um, Keaton is my favorite.
Yeah.
I would probably say Christian Bale is my second favorite. Um, I thought Affleck it took a while to kind of find his feet, but he did. I'm possibly influenced because I just saw The Accountant 2 a
Oh,
little
how
while
is that?
ago.
I love the first one.
It's the action stuff is sort of obligatory, but
Yeah.
he's got some scenes where he is just stinking hilarious. He's terrific in the movie. Um,
I did not see that coming in the final act of The Accountant. Um, who the bad guy was,
yeah, yeah.
and I didn't see it coming, and I was like, "Whoa, that is great."
So
That is,
The Accountant is a pretty smart movie, I thought.
I thought so too. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Let me see. I like George Clooney. George Clooney should have been a really good Batman, but he was a bad combination with what Schumacher was trying to do.
Yeah.
Uh, Kilmer, I truthfully kind of, I've only saw that movie once when it came out, and he sort of, dropped out of my memory.
Yeah.
Um, and who am I leaving out? I like Pattinson. Pattinson is good. Pattinson is a little too damp for me. Pattinson is a little too emo.
Yeah.
It seems to me. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody has, as we've been saying, everybody does a credible job with their own interpretation. And the different guys who have played Batman are all in their way playing a different sort of character who fits into that template.
Yeah.
And I'm totally prejudiced in favor of Keaton because I thought um, he carried that movie in a way that he 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 kind of steals the movie from Jack Nicholson, which is hard to do, if you know what
True.
I mean.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and that's the way I feel anyway. He does it just by being quiet and being intense and not being any flashier than he has to be. And the first thing he said when he read the script is it seems like Bruce Wayne is really depressed.
No shit.
And so Tim and I looked at each other and went like,
And
yeah,
it's funny
That's
because
funny.
for the younger people watching, they don't remember. Like Michael Keaton's casting was very
Oh, I was
controversial at
about
the
to
time.
mention that. Yeah.
oh yeah,
It's like,
no, it
oh,
was like
he's a comedian. You're casting Mr. Mom. Like, how
Right.
can you do this?
Right.
I
And
had to go. I had to go to the World Science Fiction Convention, and I was on a panel, and I was introduced by Julia Schwartz. I went like, shit, being introduced by Julia Schwartz, and came out and showed like the first, basically a trailer's worth of footage, not even cut into a trailer, but it was just showing the fan base um, what the movie was like, and it was mostly just Keaton in his cape crashing down through the window in the Flugelheim Museum, and then fighting some thugs in an alleyway. And it was all kind of action based. There was some stuff with the Batmobile,
What was the
all
crowd's
that kind of
reaction
stuff.
to it? Did
But
they?
yeah, we were trying to sell it like, hey, see, it
Yeah.
really is dark Batman. And it was hugely controversial at the time because everybody had been hearing, oh, there's going to be a Batman movie and it's going to be a real Batman and it's going to be dark. And then Keaton got cast, and everybody thought like, "Oh man, we're back to the TV
Adam
series."
West. Adam West.
Yeah,
Yeah. I remember
yeah.
Adam West saying, "I didn't even get a phone call," and I thought at the time I was only like 19. I was like, "Well, of course you didn't get a phone call." Jeez. What do you expect? But yeah, he was in a movie called Clean and Sober that came
Well,
out right
Clean and
before.
Sober is the movie that basically told everybody that Keaton was a serious actor.
Well,
Yeah.
I wanted to see that Batman trailer so badly that I went and rented Clean and Sober. I heard that the trailer was on the Clean and Sober VHS. So I
Aha.
went to the video store, rented Clean and Sober. I've still never seen the movie, but I only rented it for the Batman trailer. And I was like, "Oh man, this is gonna be great," you know. And it was. It was great.
Well, thank you
So
again.
yeah, it really was. And I don't think, especially younger people today, realize what how when that once that movie came out, people realized it was great. How what how freaking huge it was. I mean, he was everywhere. You know, it was a huge impact. So
Yeah, I was driving through my neighborhood in San Francisco. I remember at one point about a week after the movie came out, and I saw one of my neighbors out in his driveway with a bucket of paint, and he was painting the bat signal on his garage door of his house.
yeah,
And I thought, like, this shit's gone too far.
not far enough. You mean? Uh, my last question is this: what in your mind makes Batman so fascinating? And I would say, arguably, and I think Ben, you would agree with me, the most popular superhero ever. Um, I mean, you probably know, Ben. I learned this from Ben, that the Batman comic, Ben, is the standard for sales. You know,
Yeah, so at least in the Diamond Comics era, and not to get into the minutia of comic book distribution, but the way they would rank sales is, well, how'd Batman do this month? And then
right,
your book
right,
was a some percentage of that. So if Batman was always a 1, and maybe Spider-Man would be like a 1.2, and X-Men might be a 1.1, and Incredible Hulk might be a point 0.7 or something. And it was always, the scale was Batman, because Batman has been so consistent a seller since I think it's the late 60s or something. And to this very day, I mean, I think it's something like a third of DC's output is Batman related.
yeah,
Various Batman
yeah,
series, Batman Elseworlds books, Robin comics, Catwoman comics,
absolute Batman now,
everything.
Yeah,
absolute
no,
Batman.
always gonna say, we were doing Batman '89 Shadows, the first series,
Right,
and we got all these complaints from different people, and it didn't feel like 1989 because it was too woke, and all this kind of stuff like that. And part of the gag of the series is that all the issues that were hot button issues in 1993, 1994 are still hot button issues today.
right,
And my attitude is like, when people would say that, I wouldn't engage with them. I just say, hey, look, you've got like umpty nine different Batman comics you could go out and buy. Go out and buy the Batman comic that coincides with your worldview, whatever it is,
yeah,
because there are enough of them out there.
yeah. What does make him so fascinating, do you think? What is it about him?
I think it's because he's not a superhero.
Yeah,
That's the first thing that comes to my mind is just that, he's a guy who is, number one, he can't fall back on his X-ray vision or his super strength or anything like that. He's just an ordinary person like us, only amplified, and weirdly dedicated to what he's doing. I did think one of the funniest lines in the Justice League movie, or it was either in the yeah, it was the Justice League movie, was when the Flash asks him, "What's your superpower?" And he says, "I'm rich."
right,
And the thing is, you've got this guy, and he's obviously a billionaire, and he can afford to do anything he wants. He can buy anything he wants, and the only thing that gives him pleasure, gives him satisfaction, is going out and putting his life on the line, night after night, fighting crime. And to me, often you have people who say, well, Batman is the world's greatest detective, and Batman is the world's greatest this and that, and he's the world's most brilliant sleuth, and he's the world's greatest, physical specimen, and he's a master of all forms of combat, and so forth and so on. And to me, that's always like, that guy's not interesting. The person who is all of those things is sort of, weird Ubermensch. It's an attempt to turn a character whose appeal is his ordinariness into a superhero. And what makes him interesting is that there's a fighting chance that every time he goes out, he's going to get killed.
yeah,
And he goes out anyway. And he is a sort of the way I've always thought of him is he's a modern samurai. He has the sort of samurai code where he goes into battle on the assumption that he is already dead. And that is how he manages to fight, and that is how he manages to survive.
I forget who wrote it and who drew it and everything, but that Justice League series that started, I don't know, somewhere around 1998, the comic book series where they fight the White Martians. I don't know if you read that one, but
Did not.
in
That was Grant Morrison.
Yeah, well,
Oh, okay.
in the first issue, he's in the bat plane and he's flying alongside Superman, and he says something to the effect of, I don't have powers, I I can't says something like, all these other people I'm working with, they have no training, barring Wonder Woman maybe. And he goes, I can't fall back on all that stuff. He mentions it, I wish I could remember the line exactly. But the other thing about Bruce Wayne is there's a phrase, the laser beam power of focus,
Yeah.
which I think of when I think of Batman. You know, he's so super focused on this is what he's doing. You know, um,
And and the other interesting thing is that robs him of so much in the way of just having a normal life, of
right?
having,
There's only
what the
24 hours in
rest
a
of
day.
us have available to us. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, Tim and I talked explicitly about how, Batman is like, what happens if you decide to go on this career path and, you dedicate your whole life to, training and learning criminology and, all of that kind of stuff. And suddenly you're out here on the street and then you meet a girl and you go like, hey, what would it be like to have a normal life? What would it be like to sort of settle down, go on a picnic, or something like that? And so, we were talking about Batman literally as being the story of a man who has made an insane decision. What happens if he starts to go sane? You know, and
I like that.
that has and I think there's a comic series called Going Sane. Is there not? Is that a yes, Benjamin? Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, I have the trade. It's a Joker,
yeah,
the Joker based series, and the idea of what happens if the Joker, if I remember correctly, it's he gets cured, and then like he's going to trial and being put, with the death penalty on the line, and that was in universe at the time. That was always the explanation back in the 70s and 80s, is we can't put the Joker to death because he's insane. He has to go to Arkham Asylum. So it's kind of addressing that aspect of it.
there also in Batman Dead White, which is a good novel. Um, there's a scene, Sam, where he's he's on a rooftop. He's about to, sneak up on some guys and listen in, something like that. And he sees, like, across the street or something. He sees this family in this, small apartment, and the the blinds are up. They're up like 7 floors or whatever. And the dad is reading a story to the kid who's going to bed, who's in bed, and the mom is smiling from the bedroom doorway. And so there's a line like, Bruce suddenly felt like they lived much bigger lives than him, you know.
yeah,
So yeah, yeah,
yeah. I mean, I think he's in his way omnipotent. The way people always, but he also is like he's really damaged and he can't be fixed.
right,
That's part of it too. I mean, I think that's why the character is. I think that's a part of the character's appeal that is essential. You have to understand that, Batman is always borderline nuts
yeah.
because of what's happened to him and because of the way that he's nursed it internally. Yeah.
You want to get nuts? Let's get nuts.
Yeah. You want to get nuts? Yeah, let's get the mixed nuts. Let's get the cashews and the almonds.
Well, Sam, thank you for doing this. It's so great to see you again.
Oh, it is
So,
my great pleasure anytime. I really
well,
enjoy
thank
talking
you.
to you guys, as you know.
Yeah,
But
I know it's
yeah,
always have
yeah,
such
it
fun.
took us many tries. Took us many tries to get this together, but we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, that would be
Yeah.
great. Thank you for offering. I'll take you up on it. Matt?
All right. That's a deal, guys. Great to make your acquaintance.
Wait, just wait,
Matt,
wait. The story that you're interested in, it's in the side chat.
saw it. Thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted to thank you for that.
And
Okay,
the prize,
we
yeah.
do have a prize, a story collection by Will Murray. It's called The Wild Adventures of Cthulhu. It's the first of 3 volumes. They're not linked, but if you want to try to win this prize, just send an email to easyprizes@gmail.com and put, uh, I guess, wild one in the subject line.
All right.
We'll draw a winner
Thanks.
in like 6 to 8 weeks. Could be you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, thanks again, Sam. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
guys.
Talk to you soon, I'm sure. So, have a good night.
Pleasure as always.